He is arguably the most recognizable video game character in the world. The lore around his inspiration and creation has become cemented in pop culture, extending even beyond the video game hobby itself. His shape was inspired by a pizza missing a piece or two, they say. His name was changed to prevent Western audiences from vandalizing his name, they say. Maybe his name literally is a simplification of the word mouth. You never know. Regardless of whether or not you buy into any of these notions or even care, you certainly know the end result. Pac-Man, the game that took the world by storm. But are any of these legends true? And why did Pac-Man quickly become one of the most popular games of its time, on its way to become one of the highest grossing series ever in gaming history? We'll discuss this and more as we take today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope that these words find you well. I want to extend a warm welcome to you and invite you to stick around to listen to the 14th episode of our Video Game Nostalgia podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. If you're new to our listening audience, each week we look back at the current week in gaming history, pick a game release or two from it, and talk about the game, or make up some absurd topic about it. Crazy stuff, huh? If you're not new to our listening audience, well, hi, welcome back. We hope that you'll enjoy another episode of our podcast. As always, I'm joined by my co host who has, at one point, shared a name with each of the Pac Man ghosts, either Chaser, Ambusher, Fickle, or Stupid. You can take your pick on whichever one you want to call him. But around here, we call him Rob Casson. Rob, how do you do?
Well, Dave, I don't know.
Do you have a preference for which nickname we call you?
I was just thinking about that. I feel like lately, considering I've been playing a lot of Rainbow Six Siege, I'd probably be an ambusher.
You
I'm
gotta
pretty
be
good.
Ambusher? Alright, for
Yeah.
the rest of the game, I'm not gonna call you Rob, I'm gonna call you Ambusher.
Well, let's see how long that happens.
So, Ambusher, are you a fan of Pac-Man?
I have not. I am a fan of the game. Yeah, I didn't play a whole lot of it, but it is something that I have dabbled with once or twice, and I do quite enjoy playing him on Smash.
You know where I've played the most Pac-Man?
Where was that, Dave?
When I was little, the dentist's office mom and dad took us to had it as one of those tabletop arcade versions.
That's freaking awesome. They only had like little balls on wire when I was there.
Yeah, that's it. That's where I remember playing the most Pac-Man was at the dentist's office. Or maybe doctor's office. I could be mixing up the two, but it was definitely a
Doctor's
way.
office was railroad tracks and railroad trains. Maybe that's where my fascination of that came from. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it definitely mostly a tabletop. I mean, I've played it else in my life, but most of what I remember my first introduction was a tabletop. So Pac-Man,
Mm.
December of 1980. That's wow, 40, 30 years, 30, no, 40 years. It's older than I am. 40 years.
Shocking.
Whew, it is Pac-Man's 40th anniversary. That's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. So, for those of you that don't know Pac Man, and I have no idea who you are, if you don't know Pac Man, you probably are an alien listening to this from another planet because I would argue that even if you don't know video games, you know Pac Man. You think that's fair, Rob? Ambusher?
I knew it wouldn't last very long.
Just don't respond to me unless I call you Ambusher.
Oh my Lanta.
Oh, you're right. I can't keep it up, but I'm gonna try.
I feel it would be pretty difficult not to have heard of Pac-Man at least once.
True enough. Well, for those of you in the dark, Pac Man is a maze arcade game developed and released by Namco in Japan. And here in the United States, it was released by Midway Games. You may know it as a Midway game. Pac-Man's a really simple game. The player controls Pac-Man, who has to eat all the dots inside a maze while avoiding four colored ghosts. In various parts of the maze, there are large flashing dots called energizers that cause the ghost to turn blue, which allows Pac-Man to chase him down and eat him for bonus points. There's really nothing else to the game. Am I
Nope,
missing
not at all.
anything?
That's it.
That's it?
Oh, wait, wait, wait,
Ambusher?
wait, wait. You can go from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen,
Ooh, you are right, I missed
and
that
from the
part.
right to the left. Don't forget that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Do the ghosts follow you through that? I forget. Uh,
I
yeah,
can't remember.
yeah. Pac-Man as a game series is one of the highest grossing game series of all time. As of 2016, the last time we had solid numbers, the series brought in an estimated $14.1 billion. That put it behind only a few series such as Mario, Pokemon, and the Call of Duty. But why? Why? What? Rob Ambusher? Rob the Ambusher. Why do you think Pac-Man has the lasting power? Why $14.1 billion is super impressive for such a simple ass game? You know what I mean?
You know, one of the things that comes down to is probably its simplicity. I mean, it's a game that most can play. It doesn't require a whole lot of skill, and you die and you pick right back up. You can play over and over again. It's not, it's just straightforward what you have to do. And on top of that, they've incorporated it into other stories. I mean, take into consideration, I mentioned Smash earlier. It's keeping that character relevant. I mean, they're doing the same thing with the Mario and Pokemon and Call of Duty, and that's why all of these are doing so well is because they're using these continuously. They're adding on to it. They're either adding it to something else or just continuation of the series, and through that, they're keeping the interest alive. And I think one of the biggest things is, like I said, it's simplicity. It's so simple that people love it.
In a lot of ways, I'm inclined to agree. Something that was very interesting that you just said there was that a lot of other series change over time. And Pac Man has indeed changed over time, and we'll cover that. But there are a lot of different versions of Pac Man, but none of them have ever stuck. Unlike, I would argue, with some of the other series like Pokemon or Mario, for instance, that though there's a pang of nostalgia for the original, say, Super Mario Brothers, it's not nearly as popular nowadays as Super Mario Odyssey, right? Odyssey's the latest one. It's not as popular, you know? Same thing with Pokemon. I think every time there's a new Pokemon, there's fanatics about it, right? Sword and Shield is the last one. It's not as popular as what was the first one, Red and Blue. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah, and yellow.
And Yellow, Red, Blue, and Yellow. Yeah.
And yellow.
So,
Right?
yeah, but didn't Yellow come out a little bit after Red and Blue, like with some additions or something like that? I'm not the Pokemon fan. I'm not the right person to talk to about it. But anyways,
It did come after, yes.
gotcha.
It's a weird glitch in my memory.
You got these games that have all been adapted, modern, brought into 3D, and expanded upon. Pokemon is way beyond the scope of the original 150 Pokemon, for instance, and that's made it more popular. But Pac Man, I mean, we've had Pac Man Championship Edition, we've had the world's biggest Pac Man, but it's still just Pac Man. It hasn't drastically changed. I
Whoa,
think that's
whoa, Dave.
pretty.
I think you're forgetting one imperative thing.
What's that?
Ms. Pac-Man.
Oh, we'll get into Miss Pac Man momentarily, but Pac-Man's just Pac-Man. I think that's awesome, frankly. I mean, I genuinely think that's awesome. There are a few games that can say they have the staying power as this without drastically adapting through the years. Pac-Man, I think, from my standpoint, is an absolute masterclass in game development. Um, you know, let's let's take some time and kind of get into that. Ambusher.
Yes,
Do
Dave.
do you ever watch video game documentaries or books on the history of gaming or anything of the such? Or is
uh,
nobody quite nearly as big of a dork about video games as I am?
I have seen a few videos here and there of some video game related historical moments or
Well,
happenings.
I mean, Pac-Man is one of those games that's almost always a topic in a video game history documentary. Did you watch that one on Netflix, High Class? That's probably the one. Did you?
Maybe.
Yeah, so there's a real if you've never seen it, there's an excellent video game documentary series called High Score, I don't know. I
Yeah, I
it,
think it's
it
high score. I think.
I think it's High Score. It's excellent. There's more to it. I'm ill prepared to tell it though. So watch the documentary. But with that being said, I think that Pac-Man is absolutely, if we take it down to its design standpoint as a show development, I think it's an absolute masterclass. So for starters, the timeline. Pac-Man was at its time when it was released. It spent the most amount of time in development for a video game, which at the time was 1 year and 5 months. Nowadays we have games that take 15 years, Half-Life 3, to come to fruition. It's a little different. But at the time, 1 year and 5 months was the longest time anyone had ever spent on it. 1980 is right smack dab in the middle of what we call historically the golden age of arcades, right? The golden age of arcades were dominated by games like Pac-Man. In 1978, you had Space Invaders. In 1979, you had Galaxian. You had Asteroids in 79. Earlier in the year, before Pac-Man, you had Missile Command. And so at the time, you had all these games that were absolutely dominating arcades with their, you know, I guess graphics and violence, crude graphics and violence. As a result, arcades were largely seen as seedy environments. I don't know if that ever changed. No, that's not true. I guess when you have the Chuck E. Cheeses of the world, no, I can't finish that sentence, huh? I was about to say that Chuck E. Cheeses are not seedy environments, but that is so not the case.
Are not what environments? Seedy?
Seedy. Yes, the word seedy, not appealing, like, shady individuals and drugs and all sorts of other stuff going on, man.
I guess I've just never heard of the that seedy being used. I've heard
You,
shady, but not seedy.
you know what, Ambusher? You need to get your adjectives down, Pat.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, it's a lot of work when you write every day too.
Hmm, sucks.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's one way to put it. It does suck. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So
I try.
anyway, games, arcades, seedy environments. For this project, the game developer, oh crap, named Tori Iwatani, I think, chose to create a non-violent, cheerful video game that appealed mostly to women, as he believed that attracting women and couples into arcades would potentially make them appear to be much more family friendly in tone and therefore make them much more profitable. Let's be honest, they're out for money. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
And so he began thinking of things that women like to do with their time, and he originally settled on eating,
Mm.
which I think is hilarious. And he based it on the notion that women like to eat desserts and sweets, hence the cherries, right?
Who doesn't though? Come
I know,
on.
I know. But what else are you gonna come? I mean, it's not. It's kind of funny when you think about it, because not to be stereotyped, because we've come a long way in 40 years, and women like to do just about everything that men like to do. It's not like you can appeal at eating. But can you think of how misogynistic it was back 40 years ago? When you're like, okay, so here's a list of what women like to do: eat, clean, cook, uh, can we make a game about taking care of children and childbirth? Nah. I mean, like, what the fuck did they come up with, man?
Who knows, man?
I,
Times are different.
yeah, I know, but I mean, whatever. We got Pac-Man. Pac-Man likes to eat. So, where did Pac-Man come from, right? There's an old wives' tale that Pac-Man was designed after Iwatani saw a pizza with slices missing. And that's partially true. It was this which gave him the idea, along with the fact that Pac-Man is also the word mouth in Japanese, kind of sorta. The mouth in Japanese is, do you know it, Rob? You're better with Japanese than I am. Ambusher.
I think it's coochie.
Kuchiku.
Coochie.
Kuchi? Uh So it's a square shape, but Iwatani wanted to round it out. So when he rounded out the symbol for mouth, along with the fact that he got the idea with the slice of pizza missing, the combination of those ideas gave us Pac-Man, you know? And it's kind of funny because if you I went back and I read a book that interviewed old game develop not old game developers, game developers of older games about the development process. And when they were talking to Iwatani about the design of Pac-Man, it's really fascinating because there's a series, right? So when they were designing the game, someone suggested that they add eyes, but the idea was discarded because once they add eyes, then maybe they have to add glasses. Once they add glasses, then maybe they have to add a mustache. And when the goal was just to keep the game cute and simple, they just didn't want to go down the slippery slope of adding all this stuff. But can you imagine Pac-Man with like eyes and a mustache? Like, dude, all right. So we have Pac-Man, right? And Pac-Man's pretty cool. But what about Pac-Man with fucking googly eyes? Eh? Eh?
Oh my god. Or
Eh?
Pac-Man with a curly Q mustache, a monocle, and a top hat. And instead of Pac-Man, we call him Classman.
I'm sorry, but the moment you went down that, I was like, okay, well, then we just get a yellow ass Mr. Monopoly.
That's what we're going for.
Because they decided that food was going to become the primary concept of the game with the concept of eating, food was the central theme in the design of it right from the beginning. So in their initial sketchbook designs, the player was placed in the midst of food all over the screen. So just imagine the Pac-Man dropped in the middle and there's just food surrounding him. Okay? That was step number 1. But when I looked at it, they determined that the player wasn't going to know what to do with the food and there wouldn't really be a goal cuz what are you going to do? Walk around and eat everything? Like, I mean, what's the point? I mean,
Eat.
I do that anyways, frankly.
Same. Definitely relatable.
It should have been called Pac-Man. It should have been called My Life. But when I needed a goal, that's where the idea of the maze came from. So the maze was created and the food was put in it, which gave the game structure. And then the concept of the fruit came from, the eating, and they got the cherry along with that from the concept of cherry bonuses and slot machines, right? Where we get the name from is the Japanese slang word for the motion of opening and closing the mouth, which is paku paku, hence Pac-Man. I think it's paku paku. Is that right?
Sure.
Good lord, I didn't take Japanese. I'm probably butchering all these. I'm sorry if you know Japanese better than me. I know Pac-Man better. We all play to our strengths, right? Right.
It is Paku, by the way.
Paku,
And Kuchi.
kuchi, 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 koo. So here we have Pac-Man, and they have a maze and a mascot in the middle of it with food surrounding him, right? But what do? I mean, you just walk around and you eat still. There's still no goal to the game. So they determined right away that the concept of just eating food wasn't very interesting. So as a team, they decided to create enemies to keep the game exciting. And the concept for this was that Pac Man had to fight the monsters to get the food. In my house, I call that the cats. Little shits. So then they created the 4 ghost-shaped monsters. Originally, the ghosts were gonna be red, just red, but that was determined to be boring, and so Iwatani wanted them to be 4 different colors to appeal to women. Because again, from the beginning, the idea was for Pac-Man to be all bright and colorful to appeal to all audiences. But the ghosts aren't just it's not plain ghosts, right? The ghosts actually have purpose. They do something. Each ghost has its own personality. Did you know, Rob Ambusher, that each ghost has its own personality?
Actually, I did, yes.
I That's so fascinating to me. That So the design team felt it would be too stressful for Pac-Man to be constantly surrounded and hunted down, right? So they designed the monster invasions to come in waves. So it's a concept of they attack, then they retreat, they regroup, and then you rinse and repeat, and you do this in cycles. And then that concept evolved. So rather than make Pac-Man constantly hunted, they wanted to give him the opportunity to become the hunter as well, and that's where we got the Energizers from. That allows Pac-Man to chase them down. Now they borrowed the concept of Energizers. The inspiration for this was Popeye the Sailor Man. Do you remember Popeye?
Yes, I do.
I uh, I don't see a lot of Popeye these days. Nor do I see a lot of. No, actually, I probably see more spinach these days than I do Popeye. Because when I watched Popeye, I hated spinach. And I don't hate spinach. I'm not in love with it, but I don't hate spinach now. But I don't see Popeye. Wait, that's a weird correlation, isn't it?
I mean, not really having watched
Huh,
Popeye.
you've not you kind of know a little bit of Popeye, don't you? With olive
Mm,
oil and
yes, that's why I'm saying it's not so far fetched to have a correlation between spinach and Popeye.
mm,
Because, Popeye the Sailor Man needs his can of
woo
spinach to make his muscles go
woo.
boom.
I love Popeye. So weird.
Okay, Mr. Krabs.
Didn't they try to didn't they try to make a live action Popeye once that didn't go over so isn't
Th-
that Robin Williams?
I believe it was Robert Williams, yes.
So the ghosts, right? You have these ghosts and these ghosts hunt in waves, they attack, they retreat, they regroup. The ghosts, in all honesty, are the most complex part of the game, and they probably are what give a lot of the game its personality and its difficulty, right? In the beginning, we talked about their names in Japanese, which are Chaser, Ambusher, Fickle, and Stupid, right, Ambusher?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in English, those names are Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde. I mean, Clyde, really? You know, hi, I'm Clyde.
I mean, is it any better than being called stupid?
I mean, Clyde and Stupid kind of do go with one another.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm sure there's some smart Clydes out there. Don't worry, Clydes. I got your back.
Oh, of course, these names are really reflective of how they're programmed. So Blinky or Red, is programmed to chase directly after Pac-Man. Pinky and Inky are positioned in such a way that they focus on a location that's a few dots in front of Pac-Man, whereas Clyde will switch between chasing Pac-Man and running away from him. And I find it's fascinating. It's so simple. Like we look at Pac-Man and we think of Pac-Man. It's simple but complex at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
I've always been fascinated by how we don't think about it when we play this game. We are playing the game and the ghosts are chasing us, but the ghosts are doing something really simple. The red ghost is chasing directly after Pac-Man, his exact path. Pinky and Inky are looking at a spot a few dots in front of him. It's such a simple command that they're reflected to do, but it adds so much complexity to the game, and I don't know, I find that incredibly fascinating.
Oh, no, it absolutely is. I mean, when you play the game as your first time or as a kid or even just casually, you don't really take that kind of stuff into consideration. You just say, "Oh, the ghosts, they're going to get me. I got to get them before they get me." But there's actually like an entire being to them. There's more than just them. There's different thems. It's just cool.
Yeah, well, they have their own personalities. These are Pac-Man's considered one of the earliest games to have characters that have, well, character in it, to be honest, and these ghosts are the characters. In pop culture, they're just ghosts, but there's so much more to them. And then there's not at the same time, and that's so cool. It's so cool.
That it is, Dave.
So we have the ghosts and their programming, and as the levels increase in number, these ghosts become faster, and the effect of the energizers decreases in duration, so less time to gobble, gobble, gobble. And this brings us to the end of the game. Pac Man is famous for becoming unplayable at the 256th level due to an integer overflow that affects the game memory. Gets to 256, and the screen gets all garbled, and you can't complete the game. Rob Ambusher. Have you ever seen video or watched someone get to the 256th level?
256, yes, but after that, nothing. Just poof. No memory of anything.
Yeah, that sounds like par for the course, Ambusher. Par for the course.
Stay away from manager overflow, kids.
It'll get you, and it gets worse as you get older. The closer you get to that 256th level, the worse it gets. I'm telling you. Enjoy your memory while you can, because that overflow is a son of a bitch. Just is. All you older gamers, y'all know what I'm talking about. Know what I'm talking about. And that brings us to the sound of the game. It's really fascinating because Pac-Man has some very distinct sounds, but really they did a design session where they ate fruit and they made gurgling sounds. And that's it. That's where we get our waka 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 waka. Isn't that what it is? I
Yep,
can't do Pac-Man. Waka 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 waka.
there you go.
And then, of course, you've got the name Pac Man. So originally, Pac Man was titled Puck-Man, based on its working title from the slang for opening and closing the mouth, which was what Paku Paku, and its distinct puck shape. That brings us into 1980. Towards the end of May into June, it was tested in Japan. It was received favorably, so it was released nationwide in July, and it was successful. It may not have been the most successful game in Japan. It was outdone by Galaxian, but it was quite successful still, and therefore plans were made immediately to bring it internet to international audiences. Which brings us, December of 1980. Pac-Man was brought to United States. It was no longer Puck-Man because yes, the old lore is correct. They were afraid of everyone vandalizing it and changing the P to an F, and no one wants to play Fuck-Man, so they changed it to Pac-Man. Um,
Dave, there are
so
many adult websites that beg to differ, but
no one
I
wants to play.
digress.
No one wants to play Pac-Man. Well, every time I think of that, I think of the movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Where Scott Pilgrim first meets Ramona Flowers, and he's like, "Hey, did you know that when they brought Pac-Man over to the United States, they changed the P to an F because they were afraid of people?" And then he messes it up, and I mess it up too because I'm Scott Pilgrim awkward myself.
Sure.
You don't remember that scene at all? Have you ever even seen Scott Pilgrim?
Is that a question, Dave? Come on. Of course I've seen the movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Likely story. Likely story.
The Evil X's, man.
The evil X's indeed.
This is the League of Evil X's, I believe. But, it's been a while.
My seven ex-boyfriends. Exes. That's what I said. No X's. Pac-Man, $14.1 billion and counting, but it began somewhere. Like I said, Pac-Man was moderately successful in Japan, but it was a runaway hit in the United States. Within a year, more than 100,000 arcade units had been sold, and it grossed more than $1 billion in coin sales. It was easily the most successful coin operated arcade in the country, and $1 billion in revenue was enough money for it to be more profitable than Star Wars A New Hope, the original Star Wars, was back then. Of course, now that's way different. Star Wars as a franchise is unbelievably profitable, but at the time, Pac-Man outdid it. By 1982, a total of over 400,000 units had been sold, and they brought in an estimated $7 billion in coins. And by 1982, merchandising sales exceeded $1 billion too. So we're talking $8 billion, in 2 years. In 1980, that's a mind-boggling amount today, and they did it in 1980, 40 years ago. God, I
Wow.
would love to know what that is in inflation, but I didn't think ahead, so someone's gonna have to look that up, and your mind will be blown. Pac-Man holds the Guinness World Record for the most coin-operated arcade machines installed at one time throughout the world. Because of course they may have sold 400,000 units, but they're not all in use at one time. They break, they get repaired, they go in and out. But the most Pac-Man machines installed at one time throughout the entire world sits at 293,822. And you'll find that in the Guinness Book of World Records, ladies and gentlemen. So you're welcome. But arcades aren't the only place that we found Pac-Man, are they?
No, they're not.
Pac-Man has been everywhere. In fact, I would argue that Pac-Man has been ported to more platforms than almost any other game. In fact, I believe it's number two behind Tetris. Yeah, I believe it's number two behind Tetris.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, probably. Among the systems that Pac-Man's been ported on include the Atari 2600. The version of the Atari 2600 was a awful, awful port. It was notoriously bad, did not play like the original game, but it still sold over 7 million copies, which is awesome. I mean, if a game sold 7 million copies today, it would be considered wildly successful.
That it would.
Yeah, for real. I mean, a million copies right now is considered a successful game, let alone 7 million copies. Among the other systems that Pac-Man has shown up on are the, Intellivision, the Commodore, the Apple platform, early IBM PCs, TI calculators, Spectrum PCs, Atari PCs, the Family Computer, the Famicom in Japan, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Game Boy, the Game Gear, the Neo Geo Pocket, and I'm sure, that's just the early ports. I had it on PlayStation in a Namco compilation. Do you remember playing any of those Namco compilations?
Yes, that's definitely the one I remember playing. That's where I played most Pac-Man, as well as Dig Dug, and I'm sure there are other ones that I can't think of at the moment.
Absolutely. It's been on digital marketplaces, it's been on the virtual console, it's been on mobile. Most recently, we had the Championship Edition, and someone made the world's biggest Pac-Man. Pac-Man has been absolutely ported everywhere. And then, of course, you have all the spin-offs and remakes like Miss Pac-Man. Rob, you and I were talking, before recording, and you brought up Mrs. Pac-Man. Mrs. Pac-Man has a really fascinating history behind it, does it not?
Who's Rob?
Ambusher. Miss
Right
Pac-Man
you
has
are,
a
Dave.
what can you tell us about it?
Well, the Miss Pac-Man was actually just a modification to the original game board that was created. It was just a rework of the original Pac-Man to add more feminine features. And with that, it was actually just a modification to the board that was used in the arcade game. So it wasn't a completely new system. It was just a minor reworking of it.
That's true. There's a little bit of history though behind the company that did that, is there not?
Was that the one that was sued by Atari?
It was. Yes, absolutely. It was absolutely the one that's sued by Atari. So the story behind it is that there was this company called the General Computer Corporation. They were a couple of college students who were developing modification boards for arcade machines. What Ambusher there is referring to is they're most famously known for getting sued by Atari over a conversion kit for Missile Command called Super Missile Attack, which basically upped the difficulty and everything. While they were working on that, they were also working on an enhancement to Pac-Man called Crazy Otto. Crazy Otto kind of got mixed into the, Atari all the lawsuit. So basically what they did with Crazy Otto is instead of scraping it due to lawsuit, they took it to Midway, who was, the American distributor of Pac-Man. Midway was getting impatient because Namco was working on a sequel to Pac-Man called Super Pac-Man, but it had been taking too long. And so Midway bought the rights to Crazy Otto, and they worked with this GCC to change it to better reflect the Pac-Man series. That's where they got Mrs. Pac-Man. Well, okay, so initially it was Pac-Woman. Can you imagine that, Ambusher, Pac-Man, and Pac-Woman?
Ugh, it just sounds so awful.
Yeah, I know, I know. But that name was dropped in favor of Miss Pac-Man, and that's it. You got Miss Pac-Man. And guys who made like $1 billion making modification boards and then got sued. It's a super fascinating story. Aside from Miss Pac-Man, what are some other Pac-Man games that you know of, Ambusher?
Well, I know there was Junior and Baby Pac-Man.
That's very true. So Baby Pac-Man is a really fascinating one in the Pac-Man history. Baby Pac-Man was a hybrid maze game that was the traditional Pac-Man, but it was also a pinball game. So it's this really fascinating cabinet, right? It had this little 13-inch screen on the top that played this miniature version of Pac-Man. I mean, it's Pac-Man as we know it, but on the bottom of the screen there are vertical exits, kind of like the ones on the side of the screen for normal Pac-Man. And when the player goes into those vertical ones, the gameplay transfers to a pinball machine that was found underneath this little screen. You had this hybrid where they played the maze game or you could play pinball mode. It's a really fascinating version. it wasn't authorized by Namco in any way, shape, or form. What makes Baby Pac-Man so notorious is that it's what led to the relationship between Bally Midway and Namco to dissolve, because you had Miss Pac-Man and you had Baby Pac-Man, and frankly, Namco was sick of Bally Midway infringing on their intellectual property, and so they were done with it. What other ones do you know of?
Well, there's Professor Pac-Man.
Professor Pac-Man's an interesting one. That's just a quiz game. That's a quiz game. It was not very popular. They made 400 of them roughly. 300 of them ended up getting returned and were converted into Pac-Land. But yeah, just a freaking puzzle game. Some other ones in the mix. Eventually, you did have the official sequel to Super Pac-Man. Or I'm sorry, you did have the official sequel to Pac-Man, which was called Super Pac-Man. Instead of eating the little dots everywhere, it turned into fruit. And there are keys instead of energizers that would unlock doors to other sections and other levels and different power ups. It changed the game a little bit. It's not as popular, but you know what else is fascinating? While we're on the topic of remakes for Pac-Man Ambusher,
What's that, Dave?
in a lot of ways, Mrs. Pac-Man is considered more successful of an arcade unit. By the numbers, it's one of the most successful arcade games ever made. Yeah, I mean, Mrs. Pac-Man, it just it resonated. You know, you took Pac-Man, which was made to appeal to both men and women, and then direct a game directly at them, and that yeah, that's it. It is. It's considered more popular, more, but not at the same time. As an arcade unit, it was more popular. If that's what I'm getting at.
Gotcha.
You know any of the other Pac-Man games there, Ambusher? You started a few more.
There's Pack Attack.
Pack Attack. Pack Attack, if I'm not mistaken, is a puzzle game, is it not?
That it is.
Yeah, so you have your little Tetris. It's kind of a Tetris type game. You had a bunch of side-scrolling games that you started. There's Pac-Land, which I just talked about because a bunch of Professor Pac-Man cabinets were converted over to them. You have Pac-Land, Hello Pac-Man, and Pac in Time. In 1999 on the PlayStation, Pac-Man went 3D in Pac-Man World, and so there are just Pac-Mans all over the place. A lot of Pac-Man, a lot of Pac-Man. The most recent ones are the Championship editions. You got Championship Edition 1 and Championship Edition 2, which kind of modernized it. I know we talked about how Pac-Man's been the same, but it, smoothed out the graphics, made it look a little bit nicer, modernized the look of it. But it's Pac-Man. It really is. It's nice. Pac-Man's been around forever. Pac-Man is an incredibly influential video game, is it not?
Oh, it absolutely is.
What
There is no doubt.
what are some things about it that you see that's helped it keep its lasting influence all these years?
Well, it was one of the first gaming mascots.
It wa
Before that, you don't really look at the
there
shit
aren't
from
any.
Missile Command or
Yeah.
the shit from Galactica. No one's looking at those
I
and like,
mean,
oh, that's so cool.
it's not like we have giant dancing asteroids all over the place. That'd be hilarious, but it just isn't the case.
It would be pretty hilarious, but you're right. It is not the case. Uh,
Wait, we talked about Pac-Man having googly eyes. Can you imagine a bunch of asteroids dancing around or missiles dancing around googly eyes? That shit would be funny. I'm not gonna lie.
oh, that would be trippy as hell, man.
Sorry, sidetracked. Influence. What other than mascot?
Well, it established the maze chase genre. It definitely dominated that market, and there's not very many. You're gonna be able to find a ton like it, but it's definitely the most well known. But it did spark the entire genre.
For sure. What else?
Well, not with it being such a cute figure, and with the release of Miss Pac-Man, it was increasing the appeal of video games to women.
True. And we talked about the ghosts on that same vein, and the ghosts having personalities. So it demonstrated the potential of characters in games. And while we're on the topic of the ghosts, in between the levels, the ghosts chase Pac Man, and that's by all definition a cutscene. And so this is one of the earliest games that's considered to have cutscenes in levels. It's not the earliest. I have seen it online noted as being the first game to have cutscenes, but Missile Command, which came out earlier, technically has similar loading screens in between, and so you're going to get a lot of debate over which game is the earliest to have a cutscene. I'm not going to say Pac-Man's number one, but I'm going to say it's one of the earliest. Pac-Man has been in pop culture all over the place, all over the place. Where else? I remember in the early '80s. It was a little bit before my time, but I've stumbled across it. Pac-Man had his own television show. Everyone had their own television show. Crap, I used to love Saturday morning cartoons. In my time, we had a Legend of Zelda cartoon and a Captain Nintendo cartoon and Super Mario Brothers.
You have other notable films such as Wreck-It Ralph and its sequel Ralph Wrecks the Internet.
Yeah, and I believe it's got a brief appearance in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, does it not?
I believe he does, yes.
Music, it's all over the place in music. There's literally a song called Pac-Man Fever.
Yep. And there's there's a Gorillaz song entitled Pac-Man.
And then there's that one, oh god, what is it? Um, that song that's got Pac-Man. Bloodhound Gang, Mope. Remember that one?
I can't say that I do, Dave.
Oh man, that's such a stupid song, and it's got it's oh shit, there's Pac-Man. What's up, Pac-Man? Me, you bitches, I'm high on crack. It's so dumb. And then
What?
you've got to, yeah, I'll put it on the show notes. If you've never seen Moat Bloodhound Gang, you should watch at least once. But it's got a high as balls acid tripping Pac-Man drop in the middle of it. Do you remember the Bloodhound Gang at all? They did that song "Bad Touch."
Oh, yep, that does sound familiar.
Yeah, all their songs are stupid like that, and Mope is no different.
Makes sense now.
Pac-Man's everywhere. What fascinates me the most about Pac-Man is that it's so well known and pop culturally it's so relevant because nobody plays it anymore. It's not like there's a Pac-Man esport or there's new Pac-Man games that people get excited for or anything like that. Pac-Man is not, it's not like you can go on Steam right now and see millions of people playing Pac-Man, but everybody knows Pac-Man. Everybody knows Pac-Man. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It has the highest brand recognition out of any anyone. I mean, I would argue that it and Mario are probably two of the most recognizable things ever, ever, ever. Certainly more than like Aunt Jemima and I don't know. Aunt Jemima had a hell of a year now that there's no Aunt Jemima.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, I mean everyone's gonna know now. Jelly Green Giant, maybe. I don't know. I would just argue that Pac-Man is all over the place.
Agreeable.
Hmm. That's Pac-Man. I do want to take a moment. As usual, we like to see what other people have to say about Pac-Man, and it is in its 40th year. So I found a thread on Resetera that people are sharing some of their Pac-Man memories. And what's most fascinating to me is that they're really all over the place. So the first one on here is by Zan, as Zan writes that his first memory is of the Pac-Man collection on Game Boy Advance. And then after that, he remembers playing Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness on the N64. And this is right after Andy MCC says he played the 7800s Pac-Man first, but his real experience of Pac-Man came from playing in the arcade. It was everywhere in the 80s. And this is followed by Fluffy Delusions, who posted a picture of the table that I remember playing at the dentist and just said played this at a restaurant back in the 80s. I'm
Wow.
not the only one. I'm not the only one who remembers getting their Pac-Man start on a table somewhere. Those tabletop arcade games were really freaking cool. I'm not even gonna lie. So yeah, Pac-Man is really popular all over the place, and everyone knows it. Pretty much every documentary is gonna have a Pac-Man point. Every book on gaming history is gonna have a Pac-Man chapter. I don't really know what else to say. We're just adding to it, but Pac-Man is awesome, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
No, it is not.
You have anything you want to add?
No, I think we've hit Pac-Man pretty well.
I mean, I don't think we should literally hit Pac-Man. That's rude.
Wow, that's kind of what I'm here for.
Mm. Ambusher.
That I am.
Well, Rob, Ambusher, I guess you can go back to being Rob because Ambusher's not going to have an answer to the question, but it's time for the gaming question of the week.
All right, let's hear it, Dave.
So, what is a game that you didn't expect to enjoy, but you ended up liking anyways?
Ooh, wow.
I know, right? I mean, that's a hard one because why would you ever play a game that you don't expect to enjoy? Games cost money. We don't buy things that we're not going to like, you know?
Yeah, I haven't really rented a game in a long time, so it's a good, I really wouldn't be spending a lot of money on games that I wouldn't enjoy. So I've kind of done all of my research and everything, and that's a tough one. I
I know you gotta dig back. So think back to the rental games or think back to a game that a friend recommended that insisted. You know, your best friend Damon, who's joined us on this podcast, is always trying to get us to play new things. I'm sure there's something in the list that, he forced you to play and you reluctantly joined thinking that you weren't gonna like it whatsoever and then came to like it. Can you think of anything like that?
Since you do bring it up, it's actually a game that we've talked about here on this channel.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Can you take a guess, Dave? Because I'm willing to bet that you don't like it at all. That might
Dark
give it
Souls?
away. That is correct.
So
He
you
is
didn't think
actually.
You didn't think you were gonna like Dark Souls at first, huh?
Oh God, no! It's horrible. I mean, when you first play the game, it is just so freaking difficult, and like, there's no reason. And I just kept getting so frustrated, like you, and I almost gave up, and you know, I just, I couldn't get into it, and he just kept forcing me. He's like, hey, just try one more time, try one more time, and then he's like, here, watch this, just watch what I do and learn from it. So I did, and I tried it, and it started making sense, and I actually ended up putting a couple hundred of hours into the game. So I'd say, yeah, that Dark Souls is definitely one for me. What about
Nice.
yourself?
Warframe. I played Warframe early on and I didn't like it. I was coming off of Destiny. I had put hundreds of hours into Destiny. It was one of those games that was on every chance I could get and hit that wall that so many of us hit at the, end game when there was nothing left to do. And someone recommended it to me as a Destiny alternative, and I did not like it. Warframe has its merits, but it is not Destiny. It's third person instead of first person. The guns all feel similar to me. The melee. It's a game that's mostly based on melee and movement. It's got its merits, and so I didn't like it. I put it down, thinking I was never going to play it again. But my best friend got into it sometime later and really wanted me to play with him. So I picked it up again. And, the game had substantially changed by that point, and it stuck that time around. I've had a lot of fun playing Warframe with him and our clan, group of people that we play with. Um, I don't play it a lot at the moment. He has never stopped. I don't even want to think about what his hourly count is. But yeah, Warframe. I thought I was gonna not like it, and turns out I really do like it. Even if I'm not playing right now, I still find it an enjoyable game. I just have other games I want to play, and someday I'll get back to it, and everyone will welcome me with open arms like they always do. Our group of friends that play it are really awesome. They're really gracious and generous and so on and so forth.
That's
So,
good to hear.
well, that's the gaming question of the week. And that'll about do it for this week. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Just as always, want to say thank you to everyone for listening. We appreciate it. We hope that you will take some time, listen to some other episodes, reach out to us, maybe get to know us. We appreciate the support and we want to hear from you. So, Dave, tell them how they can reach out to us.
Well, Rob, if anyone is interested in contacting us, we have a website. It's www.memorycardlane.com. At www.memorycardlane.com, you can find all of our episodes. You can find show notes. I post all my resources for all the stuff we talk about. You can find our stupid faces because our pictures are on there. You can find links to our Patreon, and you can find links to our Discord where you can come and you can talk to us directly and interact with us and maybe play some games with us because that's what we're all here for is to play some games, right?
Right.
That would be a ton of fun, getting a little community gaming night going. You can also find some links to our social media. I am on Twitter at David underscore is underscore wrong. And Rob, what are you doing on social media these days?
I can be found playing games on Twitch at Fat BoiRipz, all one word.
All right. Well, that'll about do it for this week. We hope that you enjoyed our little foray into Pac-Man. I'm sure we could have talked for 2 or 3 hours on Pac-Man alone. We tried to keep it short and succinct, and I hope I didn't miss anything that you wanted to learn about. Um, but on to next week. So next week we're going to be looking at once again another incredibly influential game. It's a game that pioneered a ton of technologies that are still used to this day. It was a groundbreaking game for not just its own genre, which is the first person shooter genre, but many genres. And like I said, many of the technologies that it uses are still used to this day. It is literally a game that deserves to go down in history, and it is historical. We're going to talk about it. So next week we're going to be going into 1993, and we're going to be looking at Doom, first person shooter. What do you think about that, Ambusher?
Doom. Doom.
You ever played the original Doom?
I have, yes.
All right, so look, we have something to talk about. Have you played any of the other Dooms?
I played one of the remakes for Xbox, but
Did you play
not the
the
most
most
recent.
not the most?
No,
You haven't played Doom Eternal yet?
I have not.
Missing out, man. It's a riot. It's a riot. Ladies and gents, that'll do it for today. Next week, we're going to be looking at Doom, and we hope you'll join us as we take another trip down memory card lane.
Dua pa dua wa dua pa dua 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 dua.
Toodaloo.